Ross, Trevor, Paul, Alex and Phil Flanagan. Are members aware of any other apologies? Okay, members, minutes of the last meeting. If members are content with it, yesterday's meeting, I'll sign them into the record as members agreed.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Members, agenda item 3, which is correspondence. I had a meeting 2 weeks ago, was it, with the head of civil service, Malcolm McKibben. Deputy Chair sent his apologies, he couldn't make it. But this was on the back of an invitation going back to last November, where I, along with the clerk and the assistant clerk, met with Malcolm McKibben and Mr David Sterling, who is the accounting officer. It was a positive meeting, which emphasised the strong working relationship between PAC and DFP. And the topics that we discussed, sorry, my apologies, I forgot to go into open session.
Start again?
Yeah. I'm way ahead of myself. I forgot to open the meeting. Right, okay. So members agreed to be in open session?
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Agreed, okay. And I'll just deliberate whenever the auditor is on place. Kieran, you're very welcome to today's meeting, you and your team. Just again, members, I met with Dr Malcolm McKibben, Head of Civil Service, and Mr David Sterling, who's the Accounting Officer on DFP. Again, it was a positive meeting and it emphasised the working relationship between PAC and DFP, and amongst that there was a number of topics that we spoke on in relation to, and that was the feedback on agreed memorandum of reply protocols between this committee and DFP. We also discussed areas for improvement in relation to PAC evidence sessions and the interaction with the accounting officers of DFP. We also discussed feedback on agreed MORs and an update on the current engagement with the Audit Office about clearance and agreement of Audit Office reports. Kieran, do you want to come forward and maybe members just we were just, I suppose, Kieran, just on the back of that, I'm just asking, we didn't discuss whether there is a review going to be, you know, will this be open for review, these new protocols?
Well, first of all, the new protocols have been agreed and launched really last week.
Yeah.
And I think they're to be welcomed. And I think they're in your pack. Yes, there's quite a detailed memorandum between ourselves and DFP. I think there are quite a number of positives in it. The idea of having a senior responsible officer in each department to help clear reports. The proof will be in the pudding, because we've had some of the reports that have taken far too long to clear. And in fact, the background to this is the PAC report on science and equipment, where there was a recommendation just to have a tighter time frame. So the protocols really have come out of that, and it's an important step forward, and I think to be welcomed. But I think the proof will be a faster clearance report. There is a section about the principles of what's involved, and from the department's point of view, I think it's para 6 key principles. So I think we'll agree what we want is concise reports, that the factual presentation is fair, balanced and evidence-based. Where the report contains any conclusions which the public body is unable to agree, then the position will be made clear, and then a formal sign-off of the final report within a reasonable timescale. So we'll agree a timescale up front on each report.
The timescale is going to be different in each report.
It could be. I think that makes sense because you have a large, complicated report with, say, a lot of arm's length bodies. There's more actors there to engage with, whereas a simple report could be cleared much quicker.
Okay, Kieran, thank you. Obviously, members, the revised procedures are intended to provide the committee to make more meaningful recommendations for change. And I know one area that we discussed, Kieran, with Malcolm McKibben and David Sterling was the department making recommendations. And I know they you know, in terms of the report that they have in front of them and before it actually comes to committee, I did ask, you know, where does that leave the quality of, in terms of improving deadlines and that, and the quality of and integrity of the committee and our scrutiny role. And Dr. McKibben said that won't hamper any of the procedures that we have in place in terms of scrutiny or on quality and that. So I think I was happy.
Well, I think one of the points that remain on, I don't disagree at all with, is where we make a recommendation in our own report. So we make recommendations as well as the committee. The department then would state its response formally to that recommendation in our report. So that's, I think that's one of the ideas there that could be taken forward, which shouldn't in any way cut across the committee's deliberations. Some of our reports will quite naturally be recommendation light because it's for the committee then to tease out the issues. So that, I think that's fair enough.
Members, do you have any other comments to
Chairperson, first again, apologies for not being with you on that occasion. Certainly I wouldn't take any exception to anything that's been said. But I think as a Public Accounts Committee we need to reaffirm our independence completely from any government department and to make it clear that the resources we have at the moment must be kept, that we're keeping a watchful eye on the future of the Audit Office in terms of funding and what plans there might be for the future there. Because the one thing this Assembly needs more than anything really is a Public Accounts Committee that's entirely independent and is not subject to any kinds of pressure from senior civil servants or indeed anyone else. And I think we can take pride in the fact that it's an all-party committee. That on every occasion I can think of, individual members have risen above party politics and have not attempted to make any party political issues on it. I think that's something that we need to preserve for the future.
Yeah, Deputy Chair, I agree, and it's something that we have in the past and will continue to do so, pride ourselves in. Lucia, do you want to make any comments on the meeting or on the protocols? Or?
No, just to say it was a positive meeting and there were no issues raised in relation to the MOR protocol, which was agreed between the committee and DFP.
Okay. Okay. Roy, yeah.
One of the key principles was that all materials and relevant facts have been included in the report and are not in dispute. Ideally, you want everything with no dispute, but somebody could raise some unreasonable grounds for a dispute to exclude potentially. So I'm just seeking reassurance that that will not be open to abuse.
I think that's really important. Yeah. And you want to just mention that? I'm ultimately responsible for making the final decision.
Yeah, there is just that at paragraph 6, just at the very end of it, there is that caveat that the CNAG is ultimately responsible for making the final decision on what is published. Because I think we have found occasionally, you know, they say the facts are in dispute, but they're not really facts. It's something slightly different.
Okay,
really.
thank you.
So. Yeah. So I think that is an option there that, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility we'd have to publish a report that isn't fully agreed. We'd of course try and avoid that scenario.
Okay. Other members? Okay. Members, this is to note anyway, so I think you have an agreement to note that. Okay, Kieran, thank you. Members, moving on, in your tabled packs, we have correspondence from the Audit Office on a DARD ministerial direction from the DARD Minister. Correspondence explains that there's been a revision to the direction relating to the conditions of the scheme for transitional payments to disadvantaged areas, and the budget requirement of 2.1 million remains unchanged. Members, this is just for noting.
So what exactly is this document?
It's it's in your tabled item.
Kind of, all this was tabled, so
Yeah.
is this the smaller of the two
Yeah,
packs?
it is, yes, on page 8.
Okay, thank you.
Page 8 of it. Page 8 and 9.
Basically, what that's doing there is giving the farmers like a transitional year.
The
To move from
direct,
one
yes,
scheme to the other.
absolutely. There was already a direction on that, so this is not a new direction. It's a minor tweak to an existing direction, just around the eligibility, but there's no budgetary implications.
Members, are we content to note?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Members, the agenda item 4 under matters arising at pages 21 to 28 of your electronic packs. You will find a copy of the report by the Charity Commission on the USPCA. The clerk has also prepared a background note to the report, which you can find at page 20 of your electronic packs. So if you just want to move to page 20. And that's Lucia has prepared the background to this on that report. The issue relates to the seizure and alleged subsequent mistreatment of a number of dogs held in the care of the USPCA, which was highlighted in a complaint made back in February 2014. The Charity Commission identified that there were a number of governance issues where the USPCA lacked adequate controls and which required significant remedial action to be taken by the trustees of the charity. So the Charity Commission concluded that subsequent actions taken by the USPCA to address these governance issues were sufficient to reduce the risk posed to the effective governance of the charity. And the Charity Commission's statutory inquiry into the USPCA has now closed. Members, if you haven't saw this, if you want to just briefly have a look at it, this is to note.
Okay, noted.
If members are content to note.
Yeah.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Members, agenda item 5, moving on into the inquiry into the Courts and Tribunal Service Statement for the year ended 31st of March, which is at page 30 of your electronic packs. This is an MOR which is largely positive, where we have 6 out of the 7 recommendations being accepted. Of these, 1 has already been implemented and 4 are in the process of being implemented. 1 recommendation was partially accepted, and this related to the setting of targets for the execution of warrants. The PSNI would not commit to this due to competing priorities when it comes to the best use of police officer time. The recommendation also asked for a review of warrants outstanding for more than 6 months. Following a court ruling in 2013, however, all warrants issued now have a time period for execution written into them of 12 months. So the PSNI said it would not be appropriate for them to review all warrants outstanding for 6 months. So, members, do you want to make any comment on the MOR, which is largely positive?
Chairperson, I think we can just agree it, and that's it.
Okay, Kieran, do you want to make any comment?
No, I agree with you, Chair. Generally, it's a very positive response. Just one point I'll draw your attention to is on recommendation 2, where PSNI has said that they've introduced new strict guidelines for officers dealing with the execution of fine default warrants. They've said the new procedures have been reviewed by internal audit on ourselves. I just want to say we haven't formally reviewed them yet, but we will be reviewing them because this is an account we audit every year. So it's just a fine point on that. So we'll be back into this area when we look at the next account.
Okay, thank you, Kieran. Members, it's customary that we request an update in 12 months' time on the implementation of the recommendations. Are we content to agree on that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, agenda item 6.
Well, just before you leave that,
Sorry,
Chair,
yes.
on the 12 months review then, will that give them time to get their warrants, you know, the 12 monthly warrant thing, the issue? Well, was 12 months not too quick to get that included on it?
Well, I'll be reporting on the next set of accounts anyway,
Aye.
in this case. So I'll report the situation as I find it
That's right.
for the 14-15 accounts. But I would expect to see significant improvement.
And then it'll be the full set of accounts where we can really
Yep.
see a difference.
Okay, thanks for that clarity, Kieran. Thanks, Adrian. Members, moving on, agenda item 6, which is at pages 43 to 47 of your electronic packs, which is correspondence from DFP and DHSSPS in relation to the MOR on the Fire and Rescue Service. The correspondence from DFP is on page 43, members, which outlines their response to a number of recommendations in the Fire Service report for which they are responsible. And these responses are positive, with 3 recommendations having been fully implemented in full and 1 to be implemented in the near future. The correspondence from DHSSPS on page 45 outlines responses to a number of requests for additional information by this committee following the department's initial MOR reply. Members, and that's at page 45, and it's for noting, if you are content to note that, or if you have any comments you want to make.
Chairperson, this was in relation to appointments, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Look, I think it's a very serious matter here. This committee went into enormous detail and depth, as did the Audit Office, into producing a report what I believe, after years, transformed the Northern Ireland Fire Authority. And what have we got in return? One of the line managers who featured largely in some of the worst aspects of bad practice in November was appointed to the board of the Northern Ireland Fire Authority. The chairperson, who was a witness who was not convincing, gave an undertaking that he would resign. And then I understand was encouraged by others, third persons, to stay, and he has stayed. So in fact, I'm not convinced, despite all the glossy correspondence they send us, that there is a genuine effort to alter or change the culture that went on there before. And it has taken up most of my time in this assembly over 15 years. And I really want to see an end to it. And I'm saying, making those remarks with no reference, no adverse reference to the current Chief Executive, who I believe is doing a good job. But this appointment last November to the board has undermined confidence in the public appointment system. And after detailed investigation, I understand he went through an interview procedure where no reference at all was made to his role as a permanent employee at the fire service, particularly during those dark and troubled days when others were guilty of malpractice of a disgusting nature, and he was the line manager. I don't think we can ignore that. And I'm not sure, Chairperson, I don't want to make it difficult for anybody, but I think we need to make our feelings known that while we accept the improvements that have been made, sorry, there's major issues still over the suitability of the current chairperson, and there's serious questions about the appointment of a recent addition to the board, who was in a previous life a senior fire officer in a well-paid position and line manager to others who were guilty of things that were not good, and in many ways influenced our report.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chairperson.
Surely it's public appointments and procedure we should be going after here rather than the fire service.
Agree with you.
Aye.
I mean, I don't take any exception to anything that Adrian has just said. There is a serious problem with the public appointments procedure, but clearly and that may well be that very recently the Commissioner for Public Appointments has indicated he's not finishing his term. There is still a serious problem how anybody in a previous life was directly inputting to an organisation could then overnight almost become boss cat. I mean, how would anyone have any respect for somebody like that?
Roy?
Just, it's been some time since I've looked at detail at this particular issue. At one stage I was on the Health Committee, so I did come across some of the issues.
That's right.
I am uncertain as to whether or not the individual you're referring to, and I don't know who it is, whether or not he was directly implicated or named in any of those reports that...
I think he was.
Certainly if there was adverse reference to him, I'd want to be assured that the public appointments process would have been aware of any comments prior to any appointments. I think that's the issue that needs to be teased out.
Yes.
Absolutely, because obviously, John, I totally agree and hear what you're saying, but some things might be difficult to substantiate, and I do know, and I'm open to hearing maybe, do we write to the public appointments? Is that our remit to do so, or do you want to make a suggestion on how to action this?
Well, I think we have to express our concern about what happened, or at least to ask for a lot more. Sorry, I was trying to get the name of the person. I shouldn't have sourced that on. I mean, you just can't ignore that. You can't spend months investigating an organisation and under your very eyes, the very things that you were trying to improve or change happens.
Kieran, do you have any comment?
It is something I've talked to the Permanent Secretary about, and I suppose it said here they're sent bond went out to the market competition and they didn't get suitable candidates. That is worrying. Where does it go from here? So there obviously is an issue around public appointments, yes.
Should we write to the public appointments, making available whatever information we have regarding the individual and inquiring, given such background, how they came to their conclusion?
Could we not even, instead of us making available what we have, could they not make available to us what they had in appointing this person?
That's grand.
And let's see how it was done.
Yeah.
Well, certainly, I think what Adrian says is very, very helpful. And what I would hope, we certainly could raise it, and we could raise it also with the Commissioner for Public Appointments, because he clearly has an interest in it. And it may well be able to give us some detailed information on what could be done better to avoid any kind of situation like that in the future. I have no doubt it will be forthcoming.
Okay, so asking how they select their candidates.
In terms of protocols, do we have to liaise in any way with the Health Committee on this, or are we free to action separately? But it's, at the very least, we should be, if they are not aware of this appointment, that we should be making them aware of that appointment.
Well, there's actually precedent here where you've had, I think, the previous Commissioner of Public Appointments in front of the committee on a totally different issue. The Commissioner comes under the auspices of OFM, DFM.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think you're perfectly at liberty to engage with them.
Okay, members, we agreed then that that's the route we go down, and just asking questions around their criteria and the selection as well.
Do we ask for a written submission first of all?
We could
And
do
then
that.
see what comes out of that. If not, then we bring them in front of us.
That's dead on.
Okay, agreed.
I do know one of the Commissioner's big aims was to widen and deepen the interest in public appointments. That was a big thing on his agenda.
It seems to be, public appointments to me, you have the same group of people sitting on all these different boards or everything, but I think that has to change as well. I think that has to be opened up.
Okay, okay, members, we'll agree that action then. Okay, you got that okay, Jeff? Yeah.
got all that. Yeah.
Okay, members, moving on, agenda item 6, or the inquiry into decal major capital projects, which is at page 48 of your electronic packs. Members, you'll find correspondence from DFP outlining their response to the 3 recommendations in the decal capital projects report for which they are responsible. This response is positive, and that all 3 recommendations have been accepted. However, they all remain in the process of being implemented. And again, members, if you've no issues, I'm asking to agree on that. Okay, thank you. Okay, members.
Doesn't give us any idea there when they will be implementing it. Said it'll be at the procurement board for approval on June 15, but it doesn't actually say then when they will be implementing it.
I don't think you'll have any.
The issue of this guide will complete the implementation. Yeah, well,
Well,
maybe
sure, we'll get
after
a
June,
report in
we'll
a
get
year's time
something
anyway,
now. Yeah. Okay, we'll keep a watching brief on it then. Okay, moving on, members, into our briefing session for our next inquiry, which is the effectiveness of public transport. Members, we've copies of the Audit Office report in front of us. I think every member should have one. And at page 3 of your confidential packs, you'll see a briefing and paper slides from the Audit Office in relation to this inquiry. That's page 3 of the bigger table pack. Okay, Kieran, can you introduce the report and give us a brief introduction to the report before we move into closed session?
Okay, I'll just pass straight over to
Yeah.
Sean, who's the lead on this, if you don't mind, Chair.
Okay, Sean, thank
Afternoon,
you.
Chair, members. Just give you a brief run through. You have a set of slides that are on your pack as well, so we'll just talk you through that. Public transport activity, you probably all know, it's delivered really by and large by the 3 sort of operators under TransLink. You have Metro, Ulster Bus and Northern Ireland Railways, and these receive financial support from DRD. So what our report looks at is how DRD has overseen the performance of all that public transport activity. And you'll see from the slides and the way they're set out that the
Slides are at page 17, sorry, members. Sorry, Sean.
No problem. You'll see from the slides that the first issue, and it does take up a significant element of the report, is a concentration on an overview of the effectiveness of public transport and how it's measured the performance against the initiatives and targets that are set for it by DRD. In the original master plan for transport, which is the regional transport strategy going back to 2002. The report in general shows that against most of the performance indicators that were in that strategy, the DRD has performed very well against most of those. However, I think as a sort of an overriding conclusion on the section on performance in the report, we have some sort of misgivings about the extent to which those targets really provide a full picture of whether the objectives are being achieved or not.
and that we recommend going forward that maybe the targets should be more reflective of outcomes from public transport. There's quite a lot of input and process in the original targets. So just having said that generally about the measurement of performance, it does throw up some sort of interesting and important findings. Overall, I think what we found was that there was the number of passenger journeys across all the modes of transport, and over the 12 years, or over the 12-year period, there's been an 11% increase. However, we would, if you put that in the context of a population increase of about 7%, that 11% increase in passenger journeys isn't particularly dramatic. Within the different modes of public transport, the success story has probably been railways, and there has been a doubling of passenger journeys within that. However, I would caveat that by saying that the railways are the lower or the smaller element of the public transport function. Metro buses, again, that mightn't come as a surprise, serving the Greater Belfast area, they've also proved to be quite a successful service and popular service. Numbers again increased by over a third during the period. The fly in the ointment, I think, appears to be Ulsterbus, which would be the largest part of the public transport function, where journey numbers have fallen by 12% over the period. And other elements of the passenger journeys that we looked at, the number of fare-paying passengers has increased by just under 9%. And I suppose that sort of ties back into the things like the 11% that I was talking about and the 7% increase in the population. So there's been fare-paying passengers have increased by over 9%. What we would say about that was that in the 12-year period we looked at, up to 2013-14, the increase in that was in the first half of that period. So from about 2007-2008, there has been a bit of a falling back in those journeys, or passenger journeys, or fare-paying passengers, and it's now about like 5% down from what it was at
Sorry, Sean, is this fare-paying passengers across the board?
Yes, it will be, yes, across the board. And the other issue, I suppose, that comes into all this then, you'll be aware of the concessionary fares factor, and this has seen a massive increase over that period. There's been an 86% increase in it. So there are some of the key features of the whole area of journeys and performance. In addition to the performance of the three modes of transport, the report also looks at another number of issues within that whole area of performance. The first one was the Belfast Rapid Transit System, which you'll more likely be aware of. It was originally conceived as a means of connecting the east and west of the city and the Titanic Quarter via the city centre. The project has seen a lengthy delay. I mean, it was originally supposed to be in place by March 2012, but our understanding to date is that it won't be operational till autumn 2017. Bus lanes is another potentially emotive subject. And we've found that despite the introduction of those bus lanes, morning rush hour bus speeds have actually gone down over the period by about a fifth, and that's been a large part due to the time spent by buses at the curbside taking on increased numbers of passengers. I'd also say, as a bit of an add-on to that one, that as we understand it, Metro runs a cashless ticketing system where you get on and you don't have to, you don't take money. Ulsterbus doesn't, so I think that can add into it, the time taken if somebody is paying cash as well. Another related issue is the whole area of car parking, which has implications, we would say, for public transport. And as we point out in the report, it could be argued that the availability of car parking spaces, both public and private, doesn't do very much to disincentivise the use of cars, that there is that facility, and maybe jars a bit with that overall strategic commitment to encourage public transport. In looking at the transport performance within Northern Ireland, we also did a bit of benchmarking, and we looked at further afield and particularly compared to performance with elsewhere in the UK. And I suppose I could encapsulate that by saying Ulster Bus and Metro services, they've performed relatively well in terms of the operating cost per bus, the number of staff that will be on the bus, and on the other hand, staff wages on public transport here tend to be at the higher end, and there was also a higher ratio of management to operating staff as well among local transport providers. We found Ulster Bus provided the higher level of service in terms of the numbers of routes and the frequency of the services they provided compared to other parts of GB. Metro service levels compared less favourably with similar city regions in GB. And overall bus fares in Belfast we found were relatively competitive with other British cities. So that was the area of performance and some of the findings that were falling out of that. We looked at another couple of issues. One was funding and one was a management structure. On the funding, there's no doubt that expenditure on public transport has increased significantly in recent years. And spending on the per head of population has almost doubled from around £50 a head in 2004-05 to about £100 a head in 2011-12, although it has fallen back a wee bit more recently. It's still probably relatively underfunded compared to the rest of the UK, and I suppose that one of the key elements within this, in terms of DRD strategic commitment of a modal shift from car use to public transport, there was an aspiration that the funding in transport would move to a 65-35 split. I'm not sure what it was before, but 65 roads, etc., and 35 for public transport. In the event, we have found that that ratio hasn't been achieved, and it's 77-23. So, whereas they wanted a sort of a third of expenditure going to public transport, less than a quarter currently does. And I think we would make the comment that when you look at that, the failure to achieve that split, it's really meant that there's been a loss of public transport of about £124 million that would have been intended to go into it, but hasn't really been achieved. And I think our overall comment on that would be, when you look at that sort of that funding split, and there does seem to be quite an entrenched bias towards car usage, so it seems difficult to us to see how public transport can really gain ground against the car, against their strategic commitment to do so when you look at those factors. The final issue, as I mentioned earlier, that was the management structure. I suppose we looked at how the structures within the public transport planning and management take place and what mechanisms are appropriate. And I think you might be aware of this was an issue that certainly some members would be. It was an issue that the DRD committee has also been exercised about. A bit of the history of this: in 2002, the DRD planned to create a single agency, so independent from the department, which would regulate, sponsor and control NITHCO, the company or the public corporation which houses the three separate companies of Metro, Ulster Bus and Northern Ireland Railways. However, there seems to have been a major rethink within the department about that intention, and the agency was never created, and instead you have a separate division of DRD created in 2013, Transport NI, and within that, the public transport element was by far and away the smaller element against a roads section, which was quite big. As part of the review and to look at that in context, we went to Dublin and Edinburgh just to see how the public transport systems operated there and what structure they had in place. And in both those places, and I think indeed in line with sort of international best practice, they do have a single transport authority looking after public transport. So I think that the key thing that I think we found within the failure to go for the public transport agency independent from the department was that there seems to be a distinct lack of skills and expertise in public transport left within the department. They would say that they are bringing in consultants to try and fill that gap. But it seems to us that if you don't have the expertise within the department initially, it would be very difficult to oversee the consultants that you bring in any case. So I think all in all, we think because of that dearth of expertise and ability within the department, it's quite difficult for the department to, if you like, champion public transport. There doesn't seems to be a bit of a disconnect between what they aspire to in terms of the strategic commitment and what they actually can do practically with the resources they have. That's a quick run through of the
Thank
major
you,
issues.
Sean. Just members, before we go into questions, we have to agree to go into closed session. Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed for now.